Hello, my name is Jordy Izzard, and I am here today with Gordon Bockner, who went to Johns Hopkins University as an undergrad, graduated in 1961, and later attended the Bologna campus of SAIS and graduated or left there in 1965. Came to DC for another year, graduated with his MA from SAIS in 1966. And today's date is February 27th, 2014, and we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation, and we really appreciate your being here. So why don't we just start with what originally brought you to SAIS?
I came to SAIS for two reasons. This is looking backwards 50 years ago. One was my interest in political science and international relations, and the other was the fact that after I got out of the Yale Law School, the draft and Vietnam loomed, and it struck me as a very good idea to continue my education if it meant not going to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And then when you were at SAIS, both in Bologna and in DC, tell me a little bit about your experiences as a student on both campuses.
Well, the first thing that strikes me is that they're totally different. The experience in Bologna is predicated on the fact that you're in Bologna. That sounds easy to say, but the Bolognese environment colored everything. It was not strictly an academic environment. The students were unique and different. The professors were unique and different, not always better. A curious mix of very good and sometimes less good. But the primary attribute of the SAIS in Bologna was Bologna. Mm-hmm. There's no question. The director at that time was Grove Haynes. I believe he's probably passed away by now. I don't know for sure, but he must have been. He was an older guy even then. And he went out of his way to see to it that it was a cultural institution as much as an educational institution. I am not denigrating the educational aspects of it. We had superb professors from Europe. The American professors, as I recall, were not as good or as renowned in their fields as the European professors. But the European professors were outstanding. The ability to travel, and the university, the center, set up a European trip, which, as I recall, the only part of it I recall was Paris, but I had been to Paris before, and so that really stuck in my mind. It was like going home. And the greatest thing I think about SAIS Bologna were the student contacts. You ran into a cross-section of people, particularly from Europe, who looked to SAIS as an educational opportunity to gain access to the American system and American attitudes and thoughts, whereas I went to SAIS Bologna looking for the European attitudes and thoughts. The language element was important, and the social element of being in Italy, in a communist town. Bologna, as you may recall, was the largest, very left-wing socialist, if not communist, major city in Western Europe. It was a fascinating experience. So that was what I took out of SAIS. Bologna had more to do with Bologna than with SAIS.
Mm-hmm. And then how about when you were in Washington? What were some of your experiences there?
Washington was very different. It was once again a far more academic environment. We were much more focused on courses, learning. The cultural environment was not new to me, obviously. And it was an academic institution of the highest caliber, and I would say of a higher caliber than perhaps the Bologna campus, where an awful lot of what you got was the environment and the exposure to the the European student body. Some of those students came to Washington, but not many. SAIS Washington was a very good academic environment, and it benefited from being in Washington. And one compares it to perhaps the Columbia program or the Woodrow Wilson program, which are other master's programs in international relations, and they didn't have Washington. Washington was a great big benefit. I mean, Washington City, you know.
Sure, yeah. Where it was located and everything surrounding it. And then tell us, when you graduated in '66, maybe a little bit about what you were thinking you would do with the degree, and then how that kind of evolved in your overall career trajectory.
Well, now you're going from okay, this is highly personal. What I did is I went back to the practice of law. In the years between Hopkins and SAIS, I had gotten a law degree. And I felt, having passed the bar and having had my parents pay for this, that the very least I could do was try to practice law to see if that would light my fire. I did for a year, and it didn't. And at that point, I went back to SAIS, and I said I'd like to utilize my legal background within an international environment to see what I can bring to the table with this unique background. And SAIS, at that point, helped me get a job with Mobil Oil, which was an extraordinary benefit. Mobil Oil was terrific, and I owe that to SAIS. They introduced me to Mobil Oil and got me that job.
And then what happened from there?
I'm trying to remember. I spent several years, as I recall, at Mobil Oil overseas, which was part of the deal I'd struck with Mobil Oil because I wanted to go back overseas, and I was in Paris, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was just the most wonderful portion of my career. And then Mobil brought me back to the United States on what was apparently a fast-track opportunity, and it didn't really appeal to me for a whole series of reasons that had to do with you have to relocate and keep moving around and go through an internship program and so on and so forth. So I changed and decided that I'd like to get into marketing. In retrospect, I had no idea why I was attracted to marketing, other than that, I don't know, because I didn't know what it meant or what it contained. I'd never done any marketing, but it sounded neat. And I was offered a job at the Continental Can Company through SAIS alumni.
So again, another connection.
It was a good connection. It was a good connection. I thought that would be short term, and lo and behold, it went for 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I was very surprised myself. They didn't move me. I rose in the hierarchy to a certain degree. I enjoyed it very much. I ended up doing international marketing for Continental Can. Unlike Mobil Oil, Continental Can had absolutely no idea what international meant, in spite of the fact that they had acquired some international companies, specifically in Germany, England, Italy, and they had a relationship in Japan, which in retrospect has become one of the more important relationships that I've done, because my current career is almost entirely focused on Japan.
Oh, great.
Serendipity. Absolutely no advice can be given or offered, and I can't attribute it to any kind of foresight or intelligence. It just sort of happened. I spent 12 years at Continental. I then decided that I'd like to try to be in my own business. And I set up my company based on the contacts I'd made at Continental Can to help various licensees of Continental's technology, both in Europe and in the Far East, Australia, Taiwan, Japan, to continue to search technology, and ultimately I got involved in licensing, which brought together both my technical veneer I picked up within Continental and my legal training. So I ended up doing licensing. The big element of my career is serendipity. You know, none of this was planned. It all sounds as though, boy, you went to law school, then you went to Continental Can, you brought these two together, you ended up doing licensing. It all makes sense. It wasn't planned. It just fell out that way. And then I set my own company up in 1981, this company. So that's...
What's it called?
Business Development Associates.
Okay.
What we do is technology licensing in the packaging industry. We have had active clients both buying and selling technology in Europe and the Far East. And we today, after 35, 6, 7 years of that, our client base is mostly Japanese, and it involves helping them identify and find licensable technologies in the packaging industry relating to materials, structures of containers, processes, equipment, food preparation, a whole range of things that relate to food packaging, mostly in plastics.
And what do you like the most about your job?
I like my clients very much. I've got very, very loyal, good clients who have been with me for a long time. I like to travel, although much less now that I've reached a point in my life where I just soon stay at home. And I find that my clients are willing to come to Washington. I like the mobility of it. I got remarried, and when I say mobility, my wife is an attorney with the Department of Commerce, and I was able to pick up my business and my company and move it from Stamford, Connecticut to Washington, D.C. Nobody knew, and I can run my company from my laptop. You know, this is a whole different world than it was when I started, and I can be sitting anywhere you like, at the pool in my backyard, in Florida, wherever. I like the people. I like the expanding and increasing technology. I like licensing as an art form, and I think it is an art form, structuring licensing in and licensing out. The technology inherent in packaging and food processing is not inherently fascinating. It's not like, you know, rocket science, but it's the art of the license and the structuring licensing and the contract work. So I've been able to bring together both what I learned in law school, contractual and licensing, the negotiation function, which I enjoy, the international travel, and it happens to be in the packaging industry, not because I think the packaging industry isn't wonderful. It could be the furniture industry. It could be anything. And I've been very fortunate. It's all worked.
That's great.
Yeah, it is great, but it's lucky. People ask me, and I can remember the first interview I had with someone like yourself at SAIS saying, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I was just about to ask, what would you...
do that? Wherever you've gotten, let's assume, arguendo, that it's a good place to be. I like it, but let's assume it is objectively a good place to be. What would you recommend to people? And the answer is, I couldn't. It's all serendipity. I remember mentioning back then, and I'll mention it again, one of the most important single things that happened to me that anticipated and helped me with my career path was a taxi ride I shared going from the port of Malmo out to see Tetra Pak. Malmo's in Sweden. And we got off the ferry from Denmark, and I had to get to Malmo, which is in the middle of nowhere, and it was late at night, and that's where Tetra Pak is a very big entity in the packaging business world. And somebody offered to share a car with me. And the conversation in that car led to a client relationship that blossomed over the years and became invaluable. You cannot encourage people to take taxi rides and share taxi rides. That was serendipity. But what you can recommend people to do is two things. One, follow really what you enjoy, even if you don't know exactly where to go. And B, be as receptive as you possibly can. Another example I could give is that I met John Heinz from Heinz Foods on an airplane. We ended up talking about the closure on a ketchup bottle that we'd gotten for our dinner at the ketchup, and he invited me to come to Pittsburgh.
That's great.
You can't advise people to do that. It happened, it worked well.
But you're right, it's advising them to be open to these serendipitous opportunities.
Be enthusiastic
Yeah.
about what you're doing. If you don't really like it, you can't fake it.
Right, that's a great line.
And
Yeah.
I was lucky. Packaging is mundane and dull, and my kids would always say, why did you do packaging? And I couldn't tell them, because I don't know. It is dull, it is mundane, it's every place,
But there were other parts of the process that you
Yes.
really enjoyed.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good answer, and
it is.
It's not a good guide, because I used to go back to Hopkins or to SAIS and talk to the graduating class, and they would say, "What should we do? What steps should we take to get not necessarily where you are, but to someplace?" And I just didn't have a list of steps. I had a list of attitudes. Mm-hmm. I know I sound like a terrible old fogey guru, but that's what's helped me.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Well, thanks so much for your time today.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.